Welcome to another journey through the twisted streets and forgotten histories of gaming's darkest tales. Before we descend into the blood-soaked cobblestones of Yharnam, if you're enjoying these deep dives into gaming lore, please consider subscribing. It genuinely helps the channel more than you might think. Tonight, we explore a story of salvation turned damnation, of miracle cures that became unspeakable curses. This is the tale of the old blood, the substance that transformed Yharnam from a forgotten hamlet into a beacon of medical miracles, and ultimately into a nightmare from which few ever wake. Close your eyes and imagine walking through fog-shrouded streets, where Gothic spires pierce a moon that hangs too low and burns too bright. Picture yourself standing before the grand cathedral, where desperate pilgrims once flocked, seeking cures for ailments that plagued the outside world. They came seeking salvation. They found something else entirely. The old blood is more than just a plot device or a magical substance. It represents humanity's eternal struggle with forbidden knowledge, our willingness to embrace darkness when it promises light, and the terrible price of playing God with forces we cannot comprehend. Tonight, we trace its journey from the ancient labyrinths beneath the city to the final moments when the streets ran red with more than just blood. Chapter 1. The City Before the Blood. Long before the first drop of old blood touched human lips, Yharnam stood as an unremarkable city, nestled in a valley, surrounded by dense forests and imposing mountains. The citizens lived simple lives as craftsmen, traders, and farmers. The Gothic architecture that would later become synonymous with nightmare and horror originally represented nothing more than the aesthetic preferences of pragmatic builders working with local stone. The city's foundation rested upon something far older than its current inhabitants realized. Deep beneath the cobblestones and cellars, beneath even the oldest foundations, stretched a network of catacombs and ruins that predated human memory. The Plothymerians, as scholars would later name them, had built these labyrinths for purposes that remained shrouded in mystery. Most citizens of early Yharnam knew nothing of what lay beneath their feet. They went about their daily lives, unaware that they walked above the graves of a civilization that had discovered truths about the cosmos that should have remained buried. In those early days, Yharnam attracted scholars and archaeologists drawn by rumors of ancient ruins. The Bergenworth College, situated near the city, became a center of learning and archaeological study. Master Willem, the provost of Bergenworth, gathered the brightest minds of his generation to study history, archaeology, and the nature of human consciousness. Among his students walked future legends and monsters, though at the time they were simply young scholars eager to unlock the secrets of the past. Lawrence, ambitious and brilliant, showed particular interest in the archaeological expeditions. Gaiman, more interested in practical applications than pure theory, often accompanied the expeditions as protection against the dangers of unexplored ruins. Mikolash, eccentric even then, spent his nights poring over ancient texts and symbols that others dismissed as meaningless. Maria, of noble Canehurst blood, brought both martial prowess and sharp intellect to their group. These names would echo through Yharnam's history, though none could have imagined the roles they would play in the city's transformation. The discovery that changed everything came not through careful archaeological work, but through accident. A construction project in the city accidentally breached an ancient chamber. Workers reported strange sensations near the breach, whispers in languages that had never existed, shadows that moved without sources of light, and most disturbingly, dreams that felt more real than waking life. The Bergenworth scholars arrived to investigate what the workers had uncovered. What they found in that chamber would reshape not just Yharnam, but the very nature of human understanding. The chamber contained evidence of the Plothymerians' greatest discovery and their ultimate downfall. Wall carvings depicted beings of impossible geometry, creatures that existed between the spaces that humans could perceive. The scholars found traces of a substance that defied classification, neither solid nor liquid, neither living nor dead. It seemed to pulse with its own inner light, and those who came too close reported visions of cosmic truth that left them changed. This was humanity's first encounter with what would become known as the Old Blood. Chapter 2. The Tomb of the Gods. The Pthumerian labyrinths stretched far deeper than anyone at Byrgenwerth initially imagined. Each expedition revealed new layers, new mysteries, and new horrors. The architecture itself seemed to defy conventional understanding. Corridors that should intersect never met. Rooms existed in spaces that geometry insisted could not exist. The deeper the scholars ventured, the more apparent it became that the Pthumerians had not simply built tombs. They had constructed a bridge between the human world and something far more vast and terrible. Master Willem led the expeditions personally, driven by an insatiable curiosity about the nature of humanity and its place in the cosmos. He theorized that the Pthumerians had achieved a form of evolution, transcending their physical forms to touch something greater. The evidence supported his theories in disturbing ways. They found Pthumerian remains that showed signs of deliberate transformation, bones that had grown in impossible directions, skulls with cavities for organs that humans didn't possess, and most tellingly, a complete absence of decay, despite the apparent age of the remains. In the deepest reaches of the labyrinth, the expeditions discovered the Pthumerian royalty. Unlike the simpler remains found in upper levels, these beings had been carefully preserved, almost mummified. Queen Yharnam herself lay in state, in a chamber that hummed with barely contained energy. Her body, though ancient beyond measure, showed signs of life, or something approximating life. Blood still flowed in her veins, though it moved with a sluggish, unnatural rhythm. This blood, the scholars realized, was different from anything they had encountered. It was alive in ways that blood should not be alive. Lawrence became obsessed with the blood's properties. His experiments, conducted in secret at first, revealed its incredible potential. When introduced to human tissue, the blood caused rapid regeneration. Diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia simply vanished in its presence. Wounds healed in seconds rather than weeks. The implications were staggering. Here was a substance that could end human suffering, cure every ailment, perhaps even defeat death itself. But Willem urged caution. His studies of the Pthumerian texts, such as he could translate them, suggested that the blood came with a price. The Pthumerians had not ascended to godhood. They had been transformed by their communion with beings that existed beyond human comprehension. The Great Ones, as the texts called them, were not gods in any sense that humans understood. They existed in dimensions that overlapped with human reality, only partially, and their influence on the human mind and body was unpredictable at best, catastrophic at worst. The schism between Willem and Lawrence began over this fundamental disagreement. Willem believed that humanity needed to evolve mentally and spiritually before it could safely interact with the Great One's power. He advocated for the development of insight, the expansion of human consciousness to perceive and understand these cosmic truths without being destroyed by them. Fear the old blood, he would tell his students, a warning that would prove prophetic. Lawrence saw Willem's caution as cowardice. The blood offered immediate, tangible benefits. People were suffering and dying from curable diseases, while scholars debated philosophy. He argued that humanity could use the blood's benefits while studying its properties, learning to harness its power without succumbing to its dangers. His charisma and the promise of the blood's healing properties attracted many followers, including some of Willem's most talented students. Chapter 3. The Healing Church's Foundation. The split between Willem and Lawrence marked the end of Byrgenwerth's golden age and the birth of something new and terrible. Lawrence left the college, taking with him several vials of the old blood and a vision for humanity's future. He established the Healing Church in Yharnam, presenting it not as a religious institution initially, but as a medical organization dedicated to using the old blood's properties to heal the sick and suffering. The early days of the Healing Church seemed to vindicate Lawrence's vision. The blood ministration, as the process came to be known, worked miracles that surpassed even Lawrence's boldest predictions. The blind could see, the lame could walk, and diseases that had been death sentences became minor inconveniences. Word spread quickly beyond Yharnam's borders. Pilgrims began arriving by the hundreds, then thousands, seeking the miraculous cure that the healing church offered. The transformation of Yharnam happened with stunning speed. The influx of pilgrims brought wealth and prestige to the formerly modest city. Grand cathedrals rose. Where simple churches had stood, the healing church commissioned magnificent architectural projects that reached toward the sky, as if trying to bridge the gap between Earth and cosmos. The grand cathedral became the center of the city's new identity, its bells calling the faithful to receive their communion of blood. Yharnam, Lawrence's old companion from Bargainworth, established the workshop beneath the church. Initially conceived as a place to craft tools for further exploration of the Pythagorean ruins, it evolved into something more specialized. Yharnam had witnessed things in the labyrinths that convinced him that the old blood's gifts came with dangers that required preparation. He began crafting weapons designed not for war between humans, but for hunting things that had once been human. The Blood Saints, young women with a particular compatibility with the old blood, became central figures in the church's operations. Their blood, once treated with the old blood, could heal others without requiring direct consumption of the original substance. Adela, one of the most devoted blood saints, saw her role as holy duty. She and others like her literally bled for the salvation of Yharnam's citizens and pilgrims, their veins tapped again and again to provide healing blood for the masses. The church developed a complex hierarchy to manage the distribution and study of blood. The choir, formed from Bargainworth scholars who had followed Lawrence, continued research into the cosmic implications of the old blood. They established the orphanage, though its true purpose had little to do with caring for parentless children and everything to do with experimenting on young minds that might better adapt to cosmic truth. The school of Mensis, led by Mikolash, pursued even more esoteric research, seeking to use the old blood to achieve direct communion with the Great Ones. But even in these early, optimistic days, signs of trouble emerged. Some who received blood ministration reported disturbing dreams. They spoke of vast cities of impossible architecture, of beings that watched from between the stars, of a calling that pulled them towards something they couldn't name or understand. The church dismissed these as temporary side effects, the mind adjusting to the blood's healing properties. They established quiet wards for those whose dreams became too intense, keeping them comfortable while studying their symptoms. The first beast appeared 3 years after the church's founding. A pilgrim who had received blood ministration months earlier transformed one night, his body twisting and growing into something lupine and terrible. The creature killed 12 people before Yharnam himself put it down with a blade designed for hunting such monsters. The church covered up the incident, claiming a wild animal had somehow entered the city. But Yharnam knew better. He had seen the intelligence in the beast's eyes, the remnants of the human soul trapped within a monstrous form. Chapter 4. The Scourge emerges. The beast plague began slowly, isolated incidents that the church could contain and explain away. A missing person here, an animal attack there, always happening in the poorest districts where few would ask questions. The church's hunters, trained by Yharnam in the workshop, dealt with these early beasts efficiently and quietly. The citizens of Yharnam continued their lives, continued receiving blood ministration, continued believing in the miracle of the healing church. But the frequency of transformations increased. What had been monthly incidents became weekly, then nightly occurrences. The church could no longer hide the truth. Some who received the old blood were transforming into beasts. They coined the term Scourge of Beasts to describe the plague, presenting it as an external threat rather than a direct consequence of blood ministration. The church's official position claimed that the transformations only affected those with impure blood or weak faith, encouraging citizens to prove their devotion through even more enthusiastic participation in blood ministration. The psychology of Yharnam began to shift. The city that had welcomed pilgrims now viewed outsiders with suspicion. After all, if impure blood caused the beast plague, then surely foreigners carried the greatest risk. The church did nothing to discourage this xenophobia. It provided a convenient scapegoat for the increasing number of beast incidents. Lynch mobs formed, hunting suspected beasts or simply those who seemed different. The irony that Yharnam's prosperity had come from foreign pilgrims was lost in the growing hysteria. Geisherman's hunters evolved from a small group of specialized warriors into an organization essential to the city's survival. The first hunter, as Geirman became known, established traditions and techniques that would define hunting for generations. The hunter's dream, a mysterious realm that Geirman accessed through means he never fully explained, became a refuge and training ground for new hunters. There, removed from time's normal flow, hunters could hone their skills and prepare for the nightmarish reality of their calling. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower became Geirman's most talented student. Her skill with the Rikio, a blade that could separate into dual weapons, was matched only by her growing horror at what the hunt required. The beasts they killed had been human beings, patients who had come to Yharnam seeking healing. Each hunt forced her to confront the terrible truth that the church continued to deny the old blood was not a cure, but a curse, one that transformed its recipients into monsters. The research hall, established by the church to study the beast plague and develop new treatments, became a chamber of horrors. Patients admitted with early symptoms of transformation never left. The experiments conducted there pushed the boundaries of medical ethics into realms of pure sadism. The researchers, desperate to understand the mechanism of transformation, subjected patients to procedures that would have been considered torture in any other context. They justified their actions by claiming that understanding the beast plague would ultimately save more lives than they destroyed. One of the most disturbing discoveries came from studying the transformation process itself. The change from human to beast wasn't random or sudden. It followed patterns related to the individual's mental state. Fear, aggression, and desperation accelerated the transformation. Those who gave in to their basest instincts, who embraced violence and bloodshed, transformed more quickly and completely. The hunt itself, the very act of killing beasts, pushed hunters closer to becoming what they fought. The church developed new strategies to manage the plague. The powder kegs, a faction of hunters who favored explosives and firearms over traditional weapons, argued for more aggressive tactics. They advocated burning entire districts if necessary to prevent the plague's spread. The church knights, warriors who combined martial prowess with religious devotion, patrolled the streets enforcing curfews and hunting suspected beasts. The city began to resemble a police state, with the church's authority absolute and unquestioned. Chapter 5. The Night of the Hunt. The healing church institutionalized the hunt, transforming it from emergency response to regular ritual. They declared certain nights as official hunts, times when citizens should lock their doors and let the hunters do their grim work. The sound of the hunt became part of Yharnam's nighttime symphony, howling beasts clashing steel, dying screams, and always, the great bells of the cathedral marking the hours until dawn. On these nights, Yharnam transformed into a different city entirely. The streets emptied of all but hunters and beasts. Incense burned in great braziers, its smoke supposedly keeping beasts at bay, but more likely simply masking the smell of blood and death. Windows were boarded, doors barred, and families huddled together, praying that the sounds of violence would pass by their homes. The morning after a hunt, citizens would emerge to find their city painted with blood, bodies of beasts piled for burning, and sometimes, horrifyingly, recognizable faces among the slain. The hunters developed their own culture, separate from normal Yharnam society. They gathered at specific locations, the hunter's dream for those who could access it, various workshops and safe houses for others. They shared techniques, weapons, and most importantly, methods for maintaining their humanity. The consumption of blood became central to hunting. Hunters used blood vials to heal their wounds, growing dependent on the very substance that caused the plague they fought. The irony was not lost on the more thoughtful among them. Father Gascoigne exemplified the tragic path of many hunters. A foreign priest who came to Yharnam with his family, he took up the hunt to protect his wife and daughters. His skill with the hunter's axe became legendary, and his battles against the beasts grew increasingly brutal. But each hunt changed him, made him more violent, more eager for the kill. His wife Viola watched her husband slowly lose himself to bloodlust, becoming more beast than man, even before any physical transformation. The music box that Gascoigne's daughter treasured played a melody from his homeland, one of the few things that could calm him when the bloodlust grew too strong. But even this anchor to his humanity weakened over time. The night he failed to return home, the night his family's music box could no longer reach him, marked not just the loss of one hunter, but the demonstration of hunting's ultimate fate. Those who hunt beasts too long become beasts themselves, if not in body, then certainly in soul. The church tried various methods to prevent hunters from transforming. The hunter rune, carved from the prototype that runesmith Carol had designed after communing with the Great Ones, supposedly protected against the beast plague. Specialized garb, treated with special incense and blood ministration techniques, claimed to maintain a hunter's humanity, but these were bandages on a mortal wound. The fundamental contradiction remained. Hunters needed blood to hunt, but blood inevitably corrupted them. Some hunters sought alternative paths. The League, led by Valter, hunted not just beasts, but vermin, parasitic entities they believed caused the plague. The Executioners, servants of Logarius, pursued a different enemy entirely. Each faction developed its own philosophies and methods, but all shared the same ultimate fate. The hunt consumed everything it touched, transforming heroes into monsters with such reliability that it seemed less like a side effect and more like the intended purpose. Chapter 6. The Vile Bloods of Cainhurst. While Yharnam struggled with the beast plague, another tragedy unfolded in the distant castle. Cainhurst. This noble house, isolated in a frozen wasteland, accessible only by crossing a treacherous bridge, had its own history with the old blood. The nobles of Cainhurst hadn't received their blood from the healing church, but had allegedly obtained it through their own means, some claimed directly from a Great One itself. The Cainhurst nobles developed a different relationship with blood. Rather than using it for healing, they consumed it for power. They discovered that certain blood, particularly the blood of hunters who had themselves consumed much old blood, granted them supernatural abilities. They could manipulate blood as a weapon, drain life force from their enemies, and most disturbingly, achieve a form of immortality. The Vile Bloods, as they came to be known, saw themselves not as cursed but as evolved, the next step in human development. Queen Annalise, the immortal queen of Cainhurst, ruled from her throne with a mixture of nobility and inhuman hunger. She sought blood dregs, the heaviest deposits of human blood that contained echoes of the old blood's power. Her knights collected these dregs from fallen hunters, offering them to their queen in exchange for her favor. The relationship between Cainhurst and the healing church grew increasingly strained as both factions competed for the same resource, blood, but sought different outcomes from its use. The Executioners, led by Martyr Logarius, launched a crusade against Cainhurst that would become one of Yharnam's bloodiest conflicts. Logarius believed the Vile Bloods represented a corruption even worse than the beast plague. While beasts were tragic victims who had lost their humanity, the Vile Bloods had deliberately abandoned theirs. The assault on Castle Cainhurst was not a battle, but a massacre. The Executioners showed no mercy, cutting down nobles, servants, and anyone who had partaken in the Vile Blood communion. The siege of Cainhurst ended not with victory, but with stalemate. Logarius, unable to kill the immortal Queen Annalise, chose instead to become her jailer. He sealed her away and took up an eternal vigil on the castle's roof, using his own life force to maintain the barrier that kept her imprisoned. His crown of illusions hid the castle from the outside world, ensuring that no one would come to free the queen or revive the Vile bloodline. Yet, even this sacrifice proved imperfect. Determined individuals could still find their way to Cainhurst, and some even chose to serve the imprisoned queen. Maria, the hunter who had trained under Yharnam, carried the shame of her Cainhurst heritage. Throughout her life in Yharnam, she had abandoned her noble blood, literally throwing her beloved Rakoyo into a well in an act of rejection. But blood, especially noble blood, is not so easily discarded. The technique she had learned in Cainhurst, the way she could make blood dance and cut, remained with her even as she tried to embrace the church's teachings. Her internal conflict between her heritage and her chosen path would ultimately drive her to madness and tragedy. Chapter 7. The Choir and the Cosmos. High above Yharnam's blood-soaked streets, the choir pursued a different understanding of the old blood and its origins. Formed from the most intellectually gifted members of the healing church, the choir operated from the upper levels of the Grand Cathedral, both literally and figuratively, above the common concerns of beast hunts and blood ministration. They sought not just to use the old blood but to understand its source, the Great Ones themselves. The orphanage served as the choir's primary recruitment ground. Children, the choir believed, possessed minds more capable of accepting cosmic truth without shattering. The experiments conducted on these orphans were couched in the language of education and enlightenment, but they were experiments nonetheless. Young minds were exposed to fragments of Great One knowledge, their reactions carefully documented. Some children gained extraordinary insights, while others were reduced to madness. The choir viewed both outcomes as valuable data. The celestial emissaries, grotesque beings with oversized heads and writhing tentacles, emerged from the choir's experiments. These creatures had once been human, specifically members of the choir who had undergone transformation procedures designed to bring them closer to the Great Ones. Unlike the beast transformation, which represented a descent into base instinct, the choir's transformation aimed for ascension. The resulting beings were certainly no longer human, but whether they had achieved enlightenment or simply a different form of damnation remained unclear. Ibraetas, daughter of the cosmos, represented the choir's greatest discovery and most dangerous alliance. Found in the Pothumerian labyrinths, this Great One appeared to be abandoned or left behind by its kind. The choir brought Ibraetas to the Grand Cathedral, hiding her in its deepest sanctum. Through communion with this cosmic being, the choir gained insights that revolutionized their understanding of the old blood. Ibraetas's blood, they discovered, was the source from which all other old blood derived, or at least, that's what they believed. The relationship between the choir and Ibraetas was symbiotic but unequal. The Great One provided knowledge and blood in exchange for something the choir couldn't fully understand. Some scholars believed Ibraetas was using the choir to search for something or someone, possibly other Great Ones who had abandoned her. Others theorized that she was transforming the choir members into something that could bridge the gap between human and Great One consciousness, creating a hybrid species that could serve purposes beyond human comprehension. The Cosmic Eye Watcher badge, worn by choir members, symbolized their philosophy that true understanding came not from looking down at earthly concerns, but up at the cosmos. They developed techniques to gain insight, the ability to perceive reality as it truly existed, rather than as human senses interpreted it. This insight came with a terrible price. Those who gained too much could see the amygdalas that had always clung to Yharnam's buildings, the writhing messengers that swam through the air, and the way reality itself bent around the presence of Great Ones. Many who achieved high insight chose madness over the burden of such knowledge. Chapter 8. The School of Mensis Ritual. While the choir sought communion with the cosmos through study and gradual transformation, the School of Mensis pursued a more direct and catastrophic approach. Led by Mikolash, who had been one of Lawrence's fellow students at Bergenworth, the school believed that humanity could forcefully breach the barrier between human reality and the realm of the Great Ones. Their methods were radical, even by the standards of a city that had normalized blood consumption and beast hunts. The School of Mensis operated from Yahargul, the Unseen Village, a district of Yharnam that had become increasingly isolated from the rest of the city. The inhabitants of Yharnam participated willingly in the school's experiments, believing that they were chosen to achieve a higher form of existence. The mensis cage, a bizarre apparatus of iron and eyes worn by the school's scholars, supposedly facilitated communication with the Great Ones by restructuring the wearer's consciousness. The fact that many who wore the cage never removed it, and indeed seemed incapable of doing so, troubled no one in the school. Mikolash's obsession with the Great One known as Kos, or as some say Kos, drove the school's research. He believed that Kos held the key to human evolution, that proper communion with this entity would grant humanity eyes on the inside, a metaphor for cosmic understanding that the school took quite literally. The experiments to achieve this communion grew increasingly extreme. Subjects were subjected to procedures that attempted to physically restructure their brains, adding new organs or modifying existing ones to perceive dimensions beyond the standard three. The menses ritual, the school's ultimate experiment, aimed to summon a Great One directly into the human world, using a specially prepared third umbilical cord, an artifact of incredible power, obtained from a source the school never disclosed. They attempted to beckon the moon itself. The ritual required sacrifices on a massive scale. The entire population of Yharnam would serve as the foundation for this cosmic summoning, their collective consciousness forming a beacon that no Great One could ignore. On the night the ritual began, Yharnam vanished from normal perception. The district still existed, but accessing it became nearly impossible. Those few who managed to enter found a nightmare made manifest. The citizens of Yharnam had been fused into walls, their bodies melded with stone and brick, while their consciousness remained trapped and aware. The Snatchers, hooded figures who kidnapped victims for the school's experiments, roamed freely, no longer needing to hide their activities. The ritual succeeded, but not in the way Mikolash had intended. The school of Mensis did make contact with a Great One, but the human mind proved incapable of maintaining such contact while retaining any semblance of sanity or physical form. The scholars of Mensis were pulled into the nightmare, a dimension where thought and reality merged, where the rules of physics bent to the will of sleeping gods. Mikolash achieved his goal of communing with a Great One, but at the cost of everything that made him human. His consciousness persisted in the nightmare, endlessly seeking the knowledge that had destroyed him. Chapter 9. The Research Hall's Dark Secrets. The Research Hall stood as a monument to the Healing Church's determination to understand and control the transformations caused by the old blood. Originally established as a medical facility to treat those showing early signs of the beast plague, it evolved into something far more sinister. The patients who entered the research hall seeking treatment became subjects in experiments that pushed the boundaries of medical ethics into realms of pure horror. Lady Maria oversaw the research hall during its darkest period. Her medical knowledge combined with her hunter training made her uniquely qualified to study the transformation process. But what she discovered there, what she was asked to do in the name of research, broke something fundamental within her. The patients trusted her, called out to her for mercy, and she responded with procedures that would haunt her for whatever remained of her life. The experiments in the research hall focused on understanding the relationship between consciousness and transformation. Researchers discovered that the beast transformation was just one possible outcome of old blood consumption. With proper manipulation, humans could be guided toward different forms of evolution. The patients in the research hall were subjected to procedures designed to expand their consciousness rather than their physical form. Skulls were opened, additional brain tissue was grafted, and sensory organs were modified or added. The results were abominations that made the beast plague seem merciful by comparison. Patients developed enlarged heads that could no longer be supported by human necks. Their consciousness expanded but fragmented, experiencing multiple realities simultaneously without the ability to distinguish between them. Some patients' heads burst from the pressure of thoughts too large for human skulls to contain. Others achieved a form of enlightenment that manifested as endless screaming, their minds touching truths that human vocal cords could only express as pure sound. The living failures, as the research hall's most notorious experiments came to be known, represented the closest the facility came to achieving its goals. These beings had successfully evolved beyond human limitations, gaining abilities and perceptions that surpassed their original forms. But they had also lost everything that made them individuals. The living failures existed as a collective consciousness, each member aware of all others, but incapable of independent thought or action. They had achieved a form of immortality and cosmic awareness at the cost of their humanity, identity, and free will. Maria's guilt over her role in these experiments eventually overwhelmed her. She had entered the research hall, believing that understanding the transformation could help prevent it. Instead, she had participated in creating new forms of horror. The blood of the patients, particularly those from fishing villages who had been exposed to different forms of old blood, stained her hands in ways that no amount of washing could cleanse. When she finally took her own life, using the very rakiyo she had once discarded, it was as much an attempt to escape her guilt as to atone for her sins. But death proved no escape. Maria's consciousness persisted in the hunter's nightmare, a dimension where hunters who had lost themselves to blood-drunk madness continued their eternal hunt. There in the astral clock tower, she stood guard over the secret that had driven her to suicide, the truth about what the healing church had done to the fishing hamlet and its inhabitants in their quest to understand the Great Ones. Chapter 10. The Fishing Hamlet Massacre. The fishing hamlet existed on the periphery of Yharnam's influence, a small coastal village where life revolved around the sea's bounty. The villagers lived simple lives, their greatest concerns being the weather and the size of their catches. This changed when they discovered the corpse of Kos, a great one that had washed ashore like a massive, impossible whale. The villagers, not understanding what they had found, treated the corpse with reverence, seeing it as a gift from the sea. The presence of Kos's corpse changed the hamlet in subtle but profound ways. The villagers began experiencing shared dreams of underwater cities and cosmic oceans. Their catches grew strange, fish with too many eyes, creatures that shouldn't exist in terrestrial waters. Some villagers developed an affinity for water that went beyond natural human limitations, able to hold their breath for impossible lengths of time or navigate by currents they couldn't explain. The old blood had found its way to the hamlet, not through consumption but through proximity to a dead god. When the healing church learned of the hamlet and its divine corpse, they saw an unprecedented opportunity. Here was a chance to study a great one directly, to understand the source of the old blood's power. The church sent its finest scholars and hunters to the hamlet, ostensibly to help the villagers deal with their situation. The villagers, trusting and naive, welcomed these visitors, not recognizing them as the predators they were. What happened next would become the healing church's darkest secret and greatest shame. The scholars and hunters didn't simply study Koisio's corpse, they desecrated it. They cut into the dead god with saws and scalpels, extracting blood, tissue, and most importantly, they discovered that Kos had been pregnant. The orphan, as this unborn great one came to be known, was removed from its mother's corpse for study. The villagers who tried to stop this desecration were cut down without mercy. But the massacre didn't end with those who resisted. The church scholars realized that the villagers themselves had been transformed by their exposure to Kos. Their blood, their brain fluid, their very cells contained information about the great ones that couldn't be found anywhere else. The entire population of the hamlet became test subjects. Men, women, and children were subjected to vivisection, and worse, their skulls opened to extract the fluid within, their bodies systematically dissected while they still lived. Geishaman and Maria led the hunter contingent that enabled this atrocity. While they didn't participate in the experiments directly, they eliminated anyone who tried to escape or interfere. Maria, who had always prided herself on clean, merciful kills, found herself hunting down fleeing villagers, dragging them back to the research hall's field laboratory. The sound of the villagers cursing the hunters, calling down the wrath of the cosmos upon them, would echo in her nightmares forever. The curse the villagers spoke proved more than mere words. Every hunter who participated in the Hamlet massacre was marked. The orphan of Kos, though physically dead, existed in a state between life and death, consciousness and void. Its rage at being torn from its mother, at witnessing the desecration of Kos and the murder of the villagers, created the hunter's nightmare, a prison dimension where blood-drunk hunters would be trapped for eternity, forced to hunt and kill in an endless cycle that mirrored their crimes. Chapter 11. The Dream and the Doll. The hunter's dream existed outside normal space and time, a pocket dimension created through means that even the Healing Church's greatest scholars couldn't fully explain. Gaiman discovered or was granted access to this realm early in the hunt's history, and it became both sanctuary and prison for those who entered it. The dream served as a workshop where hunters could improve their weapons and skills, but more importantly, it provided a form of immortality that kept hunters in the fight long after they should have fallen. At the heart of the hunter's dream stood the doll, an animate porcelain figure modeled after Lady Maria. Gaiman had crafted or commissioned this doll in his grief and guilt over Maria's fate, trying to recreate in porcelain an idealized version of his greatest student. But the doll was more than mere automaton. She possessed a form of consciousness, perhaps granted by the moon presence that governed the dream, perhaps arising from the echoes of hunters who passed through. She could channel the blood echoes that hunters gathered, transforming death into strength, making each hunter more capable of facing the horrors that awaited them. The doll served hunters with unwavering devotion, offering comfort to those who had seen too much, strength to those who had grown weak, and most mysteriously, love to those who had forgotten what it meant to be human. She never judged the hunters for their violence, never questioned the blood that stained their hands. Her existence raised profound questions about the nature of consciousness and humanity. Was she truly alive, or simply an elaborate puppet? Did her feelings exist independently, or were they projections of the hunter's desperate need for connection in their isolated struggle? Gaiman himself remained in the dream as its guardian and prisoner. Bound to a wheelchair, his body broken by decades of hunting, he offered guidance to new hunters while warning them against his own fate. His moments of lucidity alternated with periods where he seemed to sleep, crying out for forgiveness from people long dead, begging to be released from his bondage. The moon presence, the great one that maintained the dream, had made Gaiman its surrogate, using him to recruit and guide hunters in an endless cycle. The workshop in the dream contained weapons and tools from throughout the hunt's history. Each piece carried memories of its previous wielders, their triumphs, their failures, and invariably their fall. The burial blade that Gaon wielded in his prime rested here, along with firearms crafted by the powder kegs, trick weapons designed by the workshop's finest smiths, and artifacts whose purposes had been forgotten. The dream preserved not just objects, but the entire history of the hunt, a museum of humanity's struggle against the darkness it had invited into itself. Hunters who accessed the dream found themselves caught between blessing and curse. They could not truly die while bound to the dream. Death simply returned them to the workshop, ready to continue their hunt. But this immortality came at a price. Each death, each return, eroded something essential. Hunters began to forget their lives before the dream, their reasons for fighting, everything except the hunt itself. The dream sustained them but also consumed them, transforming them into instruments of violence, no different from the weapons they wielded. The messengers, grotesque but oddly endearing creatures that served the dream, provided the only communication between hunters. These beings, which appeared as malformed children or simplified humanoids, carried items and messages through the dream's network. Their origin remained mysterious. Some believed they were failed attempts at creating life. Others thought they were the souls of children who had died in Yharnam's experiments. Regardless of their origin, they served loyally, their dedication to hunters absolute, even as their appearance reminded everyone of the dream's fundamentally unnatural nature. Chapter 12. The Blood Moon Rises. When Yharnam's darkest hour arrived, the moon itself transformed. The blood moon, a phenomenon that occurred when the boundaries between human reality and the cosmos grew thin, turned the sky crimson, and brought the hunt to its most intense phase. During these nights, the very air seemed to thicken with blood, and the transformation from human to beast accelerated dramatically. Those who had resisted the scourge for months or years suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by bestial urges they could no longer control. The appearance of the blood moon signaled that the menses ritual had succeeded in its basic goal, attracting the attention of the Great Ones. The moon presence, the entity behind the hunter's dream, drew closer to the human world during these events. Its motivations remained incomprehensible to human minds, but its influence was undeniable. The moon itself became an eye watching Yharnam's struggles, perhaps feeding on the violence and transformation, perhaps orchestrating events towards some cosmic purpose that humans could never understand. During the blood moon, amygdalas became visible to everyone, not just those with high insight. These massive, spider-like Great Ones had always clung to Yharnam's buildings, but most citizens had lived their entire lives unaware of the cosmic horrors literally hanging over their heads. The revelation drove many to immediate madness. The comfortable illusion that humans controlled their own destiny shattered when citizens saw the truth. Yharnam had always belonged to beings beyond human comprehension. Queen Yharnam herself appeared in the streets during the blood moon, though whether this was her physical form or a projection remained unclear. The Pthumerian queen, whose blood had started Yharnam's transformation, walked through the city witnessing what her legacy had wrought. She appeared to be searching for something or someone, possibly the child that had been taken from her eons ago. Her presence served as a reminder that Yharnam's tragedy was merely the latest chapter in a story that began before human history. The transformation of the clergy showed the blood moon's true horror. Those who had administered blood ministration, who had preached the church's doctrine of salvation through blood, transformed en masse into the cleric beasts, massive, towering horrors that retained just enough intelligence to suffer from awareness of their fate. The irony was complete. Those who had promised to heal Yharnam became its greatest monsters. The grand cathedral, once a symbol of hope and healing, became a lair for abominations that had once been its highest servants. The One Reborn, perhaps the blood moon's most grotesque manifestation, emerged from the mensis ritual's reality-bending effects. This creature consisted of countless human bodies fused into a single, writhing mass of flesh and consciousness. Each component remained partially aware, trapped in a collective body that existed in constant agony. The One Reborn represented what awaited humanity if the Great One's influence continued unchecked, not individual transformation, but collective assimilation into forms that served cosmic purposes, regardless of human suffering. Chapter 13. The Nightmare Realms. Beyond the physical transformation of Yharnam lay the Nightmare Realms, dimensions where consciousness and reality merged into landscapes of pure horror. These weren't simply other places, but other oaths of being, where the rules of physics bent to the will of sleeping gods and human minds could be reshaped like clay. The Hunter's Nightmare, the Nightmare of Mensis, and the Nightmare Frontier each represented different aspects of the cosmic horror that had infected reality itself. The Hunter's Nightmare trapped those hunters who had become drunk on blood, lost to the violence of their calling. Here, the fishing hamlet massacre repeated endlessly, with blood-drunk hunters forced to relive their crimes in increasingly distorted ways. The architecture folded in on itself. Buildings existed in multiple places simultaneously, and time flowed in circles that always led back to violence. Ludwig, once the church's most celebrated hunter, existed here as a grotesque horse-like beast, still claiming to be guided by his holy moonlight sword, even as he devoured human flesh. In the Nightmare of Mensis, Mikolash had achieved his goal of communing with a Great One, but the cost was everything that made him human. His consciousness persisted in a labyrinthine school that reflected his fractured psyche. He ran through endless hallways, babbling about eyes on the inside, about Kos granting him knowledge, completely mad, but ecstatically so. The Nightmare of Mensis showed what happened when humans successfully contacted the Great Ones. Not ascension but dissolution, consciousness scattered across dimensions. It was never meant to perceive. The nightmare frontier existed as a boundary between human reality and the cosmic void. This poisonous swampland represented the toxic influence of the Great Ones on reality itself. Here, the very ground was toxic to human life. The architecture made no structural sense, and massive boulders fell from nowhere, as if the dimension itself rejected human presence. Patches, the spider-like nightmare apostle, demonstrated how exposure to the nightmare realms transformed not just the body, but the very nature of existence, creating beings that could no longer exist in normal reality. The winter lanterns, perhaps the most disturbing creatures in the nightmare realms, combined the familiar with the alien in ways that broke human minds. These beings wore clothing reminiscent of the doll or church servants, but their heads consisted of masses of eyes and writhing messengers. Their singing, hauntingly beautiful, caused massive psychic damage to anyone who heard it. They represented the fundamental wrongness of the nightmare. Things that appeared familiar, but were fundamentally antithetical to human existence. Travel between nightmare realms and reality became increasingly common as the barriers weakened. Some hunters found themselves pulled into nightmares without warning, while nightmare creatures began manifesting in the waking world. The distinction between dream and reality, between thought and substance, eroded. Yharnam's citizens began experiencing collective nightmares, sharing dreams of cosmic horror that felt more real than their waking lives. The question of which was the true reality, the physical Yharnam, or its nightmare reflection, became impossible to answer. Chapter 14. The Great One's Design. The Great Ones, those cosmic beings whose very existence warped reality, operated according to logics that human minds could barely comprehend. They existed partially in multiple dimensions, simultaneously, their true forms impossible for human senses to fully perceive. What humans saw of the Great Ones, tentacles, eyes, impossible geometries, were merely the parts that intersected with three-dimensional space. Their true nature remained forever beyond human understanding. Each Great One seemed to have lost a child, creating a sympathetic connection with humanity that manifested in disturbing ways. They sought surrogates among humans, attempting to create offspring that could bridge the gap between cosmic and human existence. These attempts invariably resulted in horror. Human women impregnated with Great One offspring either died in agony or gave birth to abominations that shouldn't exist. The third umbilical cords, preserved remnants of these failed births, contained enough Great One essence to transform human consciousness, granting insight at the cost of sanity. Udon, the formless Great One, existed only as voice and blood. This entity influenced events in Yharnam without ever manifesting physically, working through blood itself as its medium. Every drop of blood spilled in Yharnam potentially served Udon's purposes, though what those purposes might be remained mysterious. The chapel dweller, who offered sanctuary to survivors during the hunt, might have been one of Udon's few benevolent influences, though even this kindness served incomprehensible cosmic purposes. The moon presence, which maintained the hunter's dream and guided the hunt itself, appeared to be in conflict with other Great Ones. Its recruitment of hunters suggested it needed human agents for tasks it couldn't accomplish directly. Perhaps it was hunting other Great Ones. Perhaps it was defending humanity from worse fates. Or perhaps its motivations were entirely alien to human concepts of purpose. The moon presence's true appearance, a skeletal, damaged thing with exposed ribs and too many limbs, suggested it had been wounded in some cosmic conflict beyond human understanding. Murgo's wet nurse, a Great One that protected the consciousness of an infant, Great One named Murgo, demonstrated the bizarre nature of cosmic parenthood. This entity had no visible body beneath its robes, existing as animated cloth and blades arranged in a vaguely humanoid shape. It sang lullabies that could drive humans mad while protecting a child that might not physically exist, in a nursery that occupied space in a nightmare rather than reality. The entire scenario exemplified how Great Ones reproduced and raised young in ways that violated every natural law. The tragedy of the Great Ones was that their interaction with humanity inevitably caused horror, despite potentially benevolent intentions. They operated on scales of existence where individual human lives were less than insects, yet they seemed fascinated by human consciousness, by the spark of awareness that let humans perceive, however dimly, the cosmic truth. Every attempt at communication or cooperation between human and Great One resulted in transformation, madness, or death, not through malice, but through fundamental incompatibility. Chapter 15. The Pale Blood Hunt. Among all the mysteries in Yharnam, pale blood remained the most enigmatic. References to pale blood appeared in various church documents, hunter notes, and the ravings of madmen, but its true nature defied simple explanation. Some claimed pale blood was a special type of old blood, purer and more powerful than what the church distributed. Others believed it referred to the moon itself during certain phases, when its pale light carried transformative properties. Still others insisted pale blood was not a substance, but a state of being, a transformation that transcended both human and beast. Hunters who came to Yharnam seeking pale blood often found themselves caught in the cycle of the hunt without ever discovering what they originally sought. The search for pale blood became secondary to survival, to maintaining sanity in a city where reality itself had become diseased. Yet those who persevered, who followed the mystery to its deepest roots, discovered that pale blood might be the key to ending the hunt permanently or transcending it entirely. The connection between pale blood and the Great Ones suggested that it might be their blood in its purest form, untainted by passage through human or pothemarian bodies. Direct consumption of such blood would either grant unprecedented power or cause immediate dissolution of consciousness. The few who claimed to have encountered true pale blood described it as colorless yet containing all colors, liquid yet gaseous, present yet absent, paradoxes that reflected its nature as something that existed beyond normal physical laws. The notes left by previous hunters who sought pale blood painted a disturbing picture. Many wrote of dreams that felt more real than waking, of seeing the world as it truly is, with all comfortable illusions stripped away. They described Yharnam as existing simultaneously in multiple states, thriving and ruined, populated and empty, real and nightmare. Pale blood seemed to grant the ability to perceive all these states at once, though human minds inevitably fractured under such perception. Some scholars theorized that pale blood was not something to be found, but something to become. Through sufficient consumption of old blood, exposure to Great One influence, and accumulation of insight, a human could theoretically transform into something that transcended the beast-human dichotomy. This transformation would be neither the mindless hunger of a beast, nor the cosmic dissolution of those who contacted Great Ones directly, but something new, a human who had evolved to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while retaining individual consciousness. The most disturbing possibility was that pale blood had already been found and consumed, that the entire hunt existed as a consequence of someone successfully using it. Perhaps the hunt itself was pale blood, a state where reality became fluid, where transformation was constant, where the boundaries between dimensions dissolved. In this interpretation, everyone in Yharnam had been exposed to pale blood simply by existing in a city where its influence had taken root. Chapter 16. The Scholar's Downfall. The fate of Bergenworth's scholars served as a cautionary tale about the price of forbidden knowledge. Each brilliant mind that had once gathered under Master Willem's tutelage met a fate that reflected their particular obsession with the old blood and cosmic truth. Their transformations, physical, mental, and spiritual, demonstrated the various ways humans could be destroyed by contact with forces beyond their comprehension. Master Willem himself remained at Bergenworth, transformed into something barely recognizable as human. His body had mutated, growing additional organs and appendages in his quest to evolve his consciousness. He sat by the lake where Rom, the vacuous spider, resided, eternally contemplating the cosmic truths he had glimpsed. His famous admonition, "Fear the old blood," proved prophetic, but even he had been unable to resist the temptation of evolution. His transformation into a being covered in eyes, literally gaining eyes on the inside, showed that even caution and wisdom provided no protection against the corrupting influence of Great One knowledge. Rome, once a Bergenworth scholar, had undergone perhaps the most tragic transformation. In an attempt to shield humanity from the full horror of the Great One's presence, Rome had allowed herself to be transformed into a Great One-like entity. As the vacuous spider, she created a barrier that prevented humans from perceiving the true nature of reality. Her vacuous nature, empty of thought and purpose beyond her single task, represented the ultimate sacrifice. She had given up everything that made her human to protect humans from truths that would destroy them. Lawrence's fate proved equally tragic, though more violent. His transformation into the first cleric beast represented the ultimate irony. The founder of the Healing Church became the first of its greatest failures. His burning, twisted form retained enough awareness to suffer, to remember what he had been and what he had promised to achieve. The skull of Lawrence, kept as a relic by the church, continued to burn with an unnatural fire that never consumed it, symbolizing the eternal nature of his torment and the permanence of his mistake. Mikolash achieved his goal of contacting a Great One, but success proved indistinguishable from complete madness. His consciousness persisted in the nightmare of Mensis, but whether anything of his original personality remained was questionable. He ran through endless corridors, spouting philosophy and cosmic revelations that might have been profound truth or complete nonsense. His ecstatic madness suggested he had found what he sought, but at the cost of any ability to communicate it to or exist with other humans. The tragedy of the scholars was that each had begun with noble intentions. They sought knowledge to benefit humanity, to cure disease, to understand humanity's place in the cosmos. But the old blood and the Great Ones corrupted these intentions, twisting curiosity into obsession, caution into recklessness, and wisdom into madness. Their collective failure demonstrated that some knowledge was inherently destructive to human consciousness, that some truths could only be comprehended by ceasing to be human. Chapter 17. The streets run red. As the hunt progressed and the blood moon rose higher, Yharnam's transformation from city to slaughterhouse accelerated. The streets, once bustling with pilgrims seeking healing, became rivers of blood. The elaborate drainage systems the city had built to handle the runoff from blood administration overflowed, creating literal pools of blood in low-lying areas. The stench of iron and decay permeated everything, becoming so omnipresent that citizens stopped noticing it. The citizens who hadn't yet transformed into beasts developed their own madness. Mob rule replaced church authority as groups of terrified humans banded together to hunt anyone they suspected of infection. These mobs showed no more mercy than the beasts they claimed to fight against. They burned entire buildings with families inside, crucified suspected beasts in the streets, and celebrated their violence with religious fervor. The distinction between human and beast became meaningless when humans behaved with such bestial cruelty. The Healing Church's attempts to maintain order collapsed entirely. The church giants, massive beings created through blood ministration to serve as enforcers, turned on their masters. These beings, possessed of tremendous strength but limited intelligence, had been controlled through religious conditioning and regular blood doses. When the supply chain broke down and their handlers transformed or fled, the giants became another threat wandering Yharnam's streets, attacking anything that moved with their massive weapons. The kidnappers, agents of the school of Mensis, took advantage of the chaos to harvest subjects for their experiments. They moved through the streets with their massive sacks, collecting humans transformed or not, for purposes that became clear only when one witnessed the horrors of Yharnam. The bodies fused into walls, still conscious and screaming, represented the fate of those taken. The kidnappers showed no preference between human and beast, suggesting that the distinction had become irrelevant to their master's purposes. Central Yharnam, once the pride of the city, with its elaborate architecture and grand fountains, became a maze of overturned carriages, burning pyres, and makeshift barricades. Citizens who retained enough sanity to fear the night huddled behind these barriers, but the barriers provided only psychological comfort. Beasts could easily leap over or smash through such obstacles, and worse things than beasts now walked the streets. The barriers served mainly to trap citizens, preventing escape when the hunters or beasts finally found them. The cathedral ward, which should have been a sanctuary, became a killing ground. The church servants who had once welcomed pilgrims now attacked anyone who approached, their minds broken by the cosmic truths they had witnessed. The graves that filled the ward's cemetery burst open as the dead, animated by the old blood's influence or the proximity of great ones, clawed their way back to the surface. These revenants attacked with the mindlessness of beasts, but retained enough human form to be truly disturbing. Chapter 18. The Final Hunters. As Yharnam's night grew longer and more hunters succumbed to blood drunkenness or beast transformation, a new generation of hunters emerged. These weren't the formerly trained warriors of Gehrsam's workshop or the church's sanctioned hunters, but survivors who had taken up weapons out of necessity. They fought not for glory or duty, but for survival, and their pragmatism made them simultaneously more effective and more brutal than their predecessors. Aileen the Crow, a hunter of hunters, represented a grim necessity in the final days. She hunted those hunters who had become blood drunk, mercy killing them before they could fully transform into beasts. Her work was thankless and dangerous. Blood drunk hunters retained their combat skills while losing all moral restraints. She moved through Yharnam like death itself, her crow feather garb making her appear as a harbinger of doom, yet her work was ultimately futile, as new blood-drunk hunters appeared faster than she could eliminate them. Giura, the retired hunter, who had taken up residence in Old Yharnam, chose a different path. He recognized that the beasts retained some element of their humanity and chose to protect them rather than hunt them. His powder keg weapons kept other hunters at bay, while he watched over the beasts of Old Yharnam like a shepherd guarding a flock. His philosophy that the beasts were still people, just sick people, challenged the fundamental assumption of the hunt, but offered no solution to the spreading plague. Alfred, the executioner, pursued his own obsessive quest to eliminate the vile bloods. His fanatical devotion to Martyr Ligarius blinded him to the irony that his righteous crusade required him to commit acts as monstrous as anything the vile bloods had done. His eventual discovery of Annalise's location and his brutal attempt to destroy her, grinding her into paste with his wheel weapon, showed that the hunt transformed even those with the noblest intentions into monsters. The Bloody Crow of Canehurst, one of the most skilled and dangerous hunters, served Queen Annalise with absolute devotion. This hunter had embraced both the martial traditions of the hunters and the blood magic of Canehurst, creating a fighting style that was nearly unstoppable. The Bloody Crow's ability to manipulate blood as a weapon while maintaining the speed and skill of a hunter represented what might have been possible if Canehurst and the Healing Church had cooperated rather than conflicted. These final hunters fought in a Yharnam that barely resembled a city anymore. They navigated streets where the architecture itself had begun to warp under the influence of overlapping realities. Buildings that had stood for centuries crumbled or transformed into impossible shapes. The very air shimmered with unreality as the boundaries between the waking world and the nightmare wore thin. In this environment, the hunters were as much navigators of madness as they were warriors against beasts. Chapter 19. The Orphan's Curse. The Orphan of Kos represented the ultimate consequence of the Healing Church's sins. This unborn Great One, torn from its mother's corpse for experimentation, existed in a state of eternal rage and suffering. Its cries echoed across dimensions, a sound that drove listeners mad, with its mixture of infant wailing and cosmic fury. The orphan's very existence was an accusation against humanity, a reminder of the atrocities committed in the pursuit of knowledge and power. In the hunter's nightmare, the orphan manifested as a grotesque fusion of human and Great One characteristics. It wielded its own placenta as a weapon, a disturbing image that emphasized its unnatural birth and stolen life. The orphan attacked with the fury of a being that had been denied everything: life, mother, purpose, and sought to inflict that same loss on any hunter who approached. Its movements combined infant-like crawling with impossible speed and violence, creating a fighting style that was both pitiful and terrifying. The curse the orphan maintained affected every hunter who had participated in the fishing hamlet massacre, and, by extension, all hunters who followed in their tradition. This curse drew blood-drunk hunters into the hunter's nightmare, trapping them in an eternal recursion of violence. The curse ensured that those who lived by blood and violence would never escape it, even in death. It was both punishment and prison, keeping the hunter's sins from spreading, while ensuring they never found peace. Defeating the orphan required more than martial skill. It demanded acknowledgement of the sins that had created it. The hunter, who finally ended the orphan's suffering, had to confront the full horror of what the healing church had done, what the pursuit of the old blood had cost. The black shadow that emerged from the orphan's corpse and dissipated over the ocean represented not just the end of one being's suffering, but the potential lifting of the curse that had trapped so many hunters. Yet even with the orphan defeated, the consequences of its existence remained. The fishing hamlet in the nightmare stood as an eternal monument to atrocity, its inhabitants forever frozen in their moment of betrayal and murder. The curse might be lifted, but the sin could never be undone. The knowledge gained from the orphan's dissection had spread throughout the healing church's research, tainting every subsequent discovery with its origin in murder and sacrilege. The orphan's mother, Kos, remained dead on the beach, a god corpse that would never decay and never be forgotten. Some theorized that Kos had allowed herself to die and wash ashore specifically to test humanity, to see if humans could resist the temptation to desecrate the divine. If so, humanity had failed spectacularly, proving itself willing to commit any atrocity in pursuit of power. Chapter 20: The Dawn That Never Comes. Yharnam existed in a state of eternal night, the hunt continuing without end as the blood moon hung perpetually in the sky. The concept of dawn became a distant memory, something citizens spoke of in hushed tones like a fairy tale. Children born during the eternal night had never seen sunlight, knowing only the pale moon and the light of burning pyres. The city had adapted to perpetual darkness in disturbing ways, developing a nocturnal ecosystem where the distinction between nightmare and reality ceased to matter. The healing church's final communications spoke of a plan to end the night, to break the cycle of the hunt through one final, massive ritual. They would use all remaining third umbilical cords to summon and bind a Great One, forcing it to restore the natural order. But the church leaders who proposed this plan had already transformed into beasts or disappeared into various nightmare realms. Their plan existed only as scattered notes and the ravings of mad clerics who no longer remembered their own names. Some hunters sought to end the night through violence, believing that killing enough beasts, enough Great Ones, enough of anything would finally break the cycle. They hunted with mechanical determination, their humanity long since burned away by constant violence. These hunters had become more machine than human, existing only to kill, no longer remembering why they had started hunting or what they hoped to achieve. Their endless slaughter accomplished nothing except adding more blood to Yharnam's already drowning streets. Others sought escape through transcendence, consuming ever greater quantities of old blood and seeking ever deeper insights into cosmic truth. They believed that by becoming something more than human, they could rise above the hunt cycle. These seekers invariably discovered that transcendence and dissolution were indistinguishable, that becoming more than human meant ceasing to be anything at all. Their consciousness scattered across dimensions, experiencing everything and nothing simultaneously. The few remaining sane humans in Yharnam developed their own philosophies for survival. Some, like the chapel dweller, offered kindness without expectation, maintaining their humanity through compassion, even as the world collapsed around them. Others, like the suspicious man, who also sought shelter in Odon Chapel, trusted no one and survived through paranoia and isolation. Both approaches had merit in a city where anyone could transform into a beast at any moment. The truth that no one wanted to acknowledge was that the night might never end because it was never meant to. The hunt, the blood moon, the eternal night, these might not be problems to solve, but the new natural state of Yharnam. The city had been transformed at a fundamental level by its contact with the Great Ones, and no amount of hunting or praying or dying would restore what had been lost. Yharnam had become a wound in reality itself, a place where the cosmic and human worlds intersected with catastrophic results. Chapter 21. The Blood Minister's Testament. In the depths of the Healing Church's archives, investigators would later find the personal journal of a blood minister, one of the clergy responsible for administering communion to pilgrims. His writings, which began with devotion and ended in madness, provided a unique perspective on Yharnam's transformation from the inside. His early entries spoke of the joy in healing the sick, the privilege of serving the church, the glory of being part of humanity's evolution. His faith was absolute, his dedication unquestionable. As months passed, the minister's entries revealed growing doubts. He wrote of patients who returned repeatedly for blood ministration, claiming they needed more to maintain their health. He noticed physical changes in regular recipients: elongated limbs, enlarged teeth, excessive body hair that grew in unusual patterns. When he brought these concerns to his superiors, they assured him these were normal variations, signs that the blood was working as intended. They increased his own blood ministration dosage to help him better understand the process. The minister's writing became increasingly erratic as his own transformation began. He described dreams of running through forests on all fours, the taste of raw meat becoming more appealing than cooked food, the way moonlight made his skin itch. He wrote of looking in mirrors and not recognizing his own face, of his congregation looking delicious, of fighting urges he couldn't name. Yet even as his humanity slipped away, he continued his duties, administering blood to pilgrims who trusted him completely. His final coherent entry described the night he transformed fully. He wrote of bones breaking and reforming, of his congregation screaming as he fell upon them, of the ecstasy of finally surrendering to what he had always been becoming. The remaining pages contained only claw marks and blood stains, though forensic analysis would reveal they formed patterns, perhaps an attempt at communication from whatever consciousness remained within the beast. The minister's testament revealed the insidious nature of the blood plague. Those most dedicated to the church, those who administered and received the most blood, transformed first and most completely. The very devotion that should have protected them became their downfall. Faith in the church meant faith in blood ministration, and faith in blood ministration meant inevitable transformation. The most devout became the most monstrous, their faith twisted into hunger. His journal's discovery in a hidden compartment suggested someone had tried to preserve it, perhaps understanding its importance as a historical document. Or perhaps the minister himself had hidden it in a moment of clarity, wanting future generations to understand how gradually and inevitably the transformation occurred. The journal served as both warning and confession, a testament to how good intentions and absolute faith could lead to absolute horror. Chapter 22. The Economics of Blood. Before its collapse, Yharnam had developed an entire economy centered on blood. Blood became more valuable than gold, more sought after than any commodity. The Healing Church controlled the supply, creating a system where loyalty to the church translated directly into access to blood ministration. This economic structure reshaped every aspect of Yharnam's society, from class divisions to international relations. The blood saints, who produced the diluted blood used for most ministrations, occupied a unique position in this economy. They were simultaneously revered and exploited, their bodies literally commodified for public consumption. Some blood saints commanded high prices for private ministrations, creating a black market where the wealthy could obtain personalized blood treatments. Others were kept in church facilities, their blood harvested on industrial scales to meet the ever-growing demand. The international blood trade brought tremendous wealth to Yharnam, but also tremendous danger. Other nations sent their sick and dying to Yharnam, paying vast sums for the miracle cure. But when these healed individuals returned home, they sometimes brought the beast plague with them. Several neighboring kingdoms experienced their own outbreaks, though none as severe as Yharnam's. The international community began to quarantine Yharnam, creating economic sanctions that ironically increased the city's dependence on blood as its only valuable export. Within Yharnam, blood debts became a common form of social control. Citizens who couldn't afford blood administration could receive it on credit, owing the church service or resources in return. These debts passed to family members if the original debtor transformed or died, creating generational obligations to the church. Some families had been serving the church for so long, they no longer remembered what original debt they were paying off. The powder kegs, who manufactured weapons for the hunt, represented one of the few economic sectors not directly controlled by the church. Their workshop produced increasingly powerful firearms and explosives, selling them to hunters and the church alike. As the beast plague worsened, their weapons became more valuable than blood to some citizens. A reliable firearm offered protection that no amount of blood administration could provide. The collapse of the blood economy happened gradually, then suddenly. As more citizens transformed, fewer remained to harvest blood, maintain infrastructure, or engage in trade. The church printed blood vouchers, promises of future ministration, but these became worthless as the church itself collapsed. In the final days, blood was no longer bought or sold, but taken by force. Hunters harvested blood echoes from their kills, and citizens murdered each other for blood vials. The economy of blood became an ecology of predation. Chapter 23: The Children of Yharnam. Among Yharnam's greatest tragedies was the fate of its children. Born into a city where blood ministration was considered as essential as baptism, many received their first dose before they could walk. The church claimed this early ministration would ensure healthy development and immunity to disease. In reality, it guaranteed that these children would never know life without the old blood's influence, their development shaped by cosmic forces from their earliest moments. The orphanage, ostensibly a charitable institution for children without families, served as the choir's primary experimental facility. Here, children were subjected to procedures designed to evolve their consciousness, to create humans who could naturally perceive and interact with great ones. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones succeeded partially. Their minds expanded beyond their body's ability to contain them. These children existed in constant agony, perceiving multiple dimensions simultaneously without the ability to process or escape what they saw. Some children displayed unusual adaptations to the blood plague. Rather than transforming into beasts, they developed other abilities: prescient dreams, the ability to see things others couldn't, an intuitive understanding of the Great One's presence. The church collected these gifted children, claiming they would receive special education. What they received instead was vivisection. Their unique brains studied to understand how young minds adapted to cosmic influence. The girl with the music box, searching for her parents on the night of the hunt, represented the innocence destroyed by Yharnam's transformation. Her father Gascoigne had become a beast. Her mother Viola had died trying to reach him, and the girl herself would likely meet a tragic end, regardless of any hunter's intervention. Her music box, playing a melody that had once soothed her father's rage, became a symbol of how the plague destroyed families, turning loved ones into monsters that no amount of love could redeem. The children who survived learned to adapt to a world where adults could transform into monsters without warning. They developed their own brutal pragmatism, learning to identify early signs of transformation, to hide when the hunt began, to scavenge for food in a city where commerce had collapsed. These children aged rapidly, their innocence burned away by constant exposure to violence and horror. By the time they reached adolescence, if they lived that long, they had seen more death than most soldiers. The little ones, the messengers that served hunters in the dream, might have been connected to Yharnam's lost children. Their childlike appearance and eager desire to help hunters suggested they were echoes or spirits of children who had died in the city's various tragedies. They wore messenger hats and carried items with innocent enthusiasm, as if death had frozen them in a state of eternal childhood. Their presence in the dream raised disturbing questions about what happened to the souls of children who died in a city so thoroughly contaminated by Great One influence. The school of Mensis recruited children for their ritual, believing that young minds could better survive the transition to the nightmare. These children were arranged in ritual circles, their consciousness used as conduits for cosmic forces they couldn't understand. When the ritual succeeded in its terrible way, these children's bodies remained in Yharnam, frozen in their final moments, while their consciousness was pulled into the nightmare, where they experienced eternal recursion of their last terrifying moments. Chapter 24: The Language of Blood. As Yharnam's transformation progressed, the very nature of communication changed. The old blood didn't just affect bodies and minds, it altered how people understood and expressed reality. The Carol runes, discovered by the runesmith who bore that name, represented the first systematic attempt to translate Great One communication into symbols humans could comprehend. These runes weren't just writing, they were impressions of meaning that bypassed normal cognition, burning understanding directly into the mind. Carol, who had been a student at Bergenworth, discovered that the Great Ones didn't communicate through sound or sight, but through direct transmission of concept and sensation. The whispers that echoed through the cosmic void weren't words but pure meaning, untranslatable into human language. Carol's genius was in creating symbols that could approximate these transmissions, though the process of translation cost him his sanity. He spent his final years carving runes obsessively, trying to capture revelations that human symbols could never fully contain. The runes themselves became tools of transformation. Hunters who branded these symbols onto their minds gained abilities that reflected the rune's cosmic origins. The beast rune awakened the latent animalistic nature within humans, while the moon rune increased the resonance between hunter and blood echo. Each rune represented a different aspect of Great One knowledge, a fragment of cosmic truth that humans could barely comprehend but could still utilize. Blood itself became a form of communication. The blood echoes that hunters collected contained memories, experiences, and knowledge from their original owners. Consuming these echoes meant absorbing not just power, but fragments of other lives, other perspectives. Hunters who consumed too many echoes reported identity confusion, experiencing memories that weren't their own, knowing things they had never learned. The boundaries between self and other dissolved in the medium of blood. The citizens of Yharnam developed their own dialect of horror, words for things that shouldn't exist. They had terms for the different stages of beast transformation, for the various types of cosmic madness, for the sensation of one's humanity slipping away. This vocabulary of nightmare became essential for survival. Those who couldn't articulate what they were experiencing couldn't seek help before it was too late. The irony was that knowing the words for cosmic horror meant one had already been exposed to it. The Great One's presence affected even written language. Text exposed to their influence changed over time, words rearranging themselves, new passages appearing, while others vanished. The church's scriptures became living documents, their meaning shifting based on the reader's insight and the proximity of cosmic beings. Scholars who studied these texts too intensely reported that the words would continue moving, even when they closed their eyes, writing themselves across the inside of their eyelids in scripts that had never existed. Chapter 25: The False God. As traditional faith collapsed under the weight of cosmic revelation, Yharnam's citizens sought new objects of worship, the Great Ones, despite or perhaps because of their incomprehensible nature, became deities to different factions. This worship took forms that would have been considered heretical before the plague, but now seemed like the only rational response to an irrational reality. The Church of the Good Chalice emerged from the remnants of the healing church, worshipping the chalices used in Pthumerian rituals. They believed that proper use of these chalices could summon beneficial Great Ones, entities that would cure the plague rather than spread it. Their rituals involved filling chalices with various blood mixtures, seeking the perfect combination that would attract a divine intervention. The fact that their rituals occasionally succeeded, summoning things that were definitely not beneficial, didn't deter their faith. Ebriates gained her own cult within the choir, scholars who believed she was the only Great One who truly cared for humanity. They interpreted her staying behind when other Great Ones ascended as an act of sacrifice, choosing to remain with humanity out of compassion. These cultists brought her offerings of blood and knowledge, receiving incomprehensible wisdom in return. They failed to consider that Ebriates might have been left behind for a reason, that even other Great Ones found her presence disturbing. The Moon Presence, despite its role in perpetuating the hunt, had devotees who saw it as humanity's secret protector. They believed the hunt existed not to torment humans, but to strengthen them, that the Moon Presence was training humanity to defend itself against worse cosmic threats. These believers willingly entered the hunter's dream, seeing their eternal servitude as a form of worship. They never questioned why a protector would demand such bloody devotion. Some worshiped the beast themselves, seeing the transformation not as corruption, but as revelation of humanity's true nature. The beast-possessed soul, encountered in the deepest chalice dungeons, might have been an early adherent to this philosophy. These beast worshippers deliberately sought transformation, conducting rituals designed to accelerate their evolution into beasts. They believed that human consciousness was a prison, and that beasthood offered freedom from the burden of rational thought. The most disturbing cult worshipped the concept of the hunt itself. They saw the cycle of violence as a divine mandate, the eternal night as paradise, the blood moon as the true sun. These fanatics hunted not out of necessity but out of religious ecstasy, believing each kill brought them closer to cosmic truth. They decorated their weapons with religious symbols, said prayers before each hunt, and treated their blood vials as holy communion. Their faith transformed the hunt from tragedy to sacrament. Chapter 26. The Architecture of Madness. Yharnam's architecture had always been imposing, but as the city fell deeper into nightmare, the buildings themselves seemed to respond to the cosmic infection. Structures that had stood for centuries began to warp, their Gothic spires twisting into impossible angles, their foundations sinking into geometries that shouldn't exist. The city's physical form reflected its spiritual dissolution, stone and mortar infected by the same forces that transformed flesh and blood. The Grand Cathedral underwent the most dramatic transformation. Its interior expanded beyond its exterior dimensions, creating halls and chambers that couldn't physically fit within the building's footprint. Explorers reported finding rooms that led back to themselves, stairs that ascended while going down, and windows that showed views of Yharnam from impossible perspectives. The cathedral had become a physical paradox, a structure that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The lecture hall of Bergenworth existed in an even stranger state, partially pulled into the nightmare but not fully transported. Students and faculty who had been present during the transition found themselves trapped between realities, existing as echoes in a building that was simultaneously real and unreal. They continued their studies, unaware that they were no longer entirely alive, researching questions whose answers had destroyed them. The streets themselves began to exhibit non-Euclidean properties. Hunters reported taking paths that should lead to familiar locations, but instead arrived at places that shouldn't exist. The city's layout became fluid, changing based on factors no one could identify. Maps became useless as landmarks shifted position, distances varied, and entire districts appeared or disappeared based on the observer's level of insight. The workshops where hunters crafted their weapons absorbed the violence enacted with their creations. Bloodstains appeared on walls that had never seen combat. Screams echoed from empty rooms, and occasionally, weapons would craft themselves, appearing fully formed without any smith's intervention. These spontaneous weapons were often the most effective against beasts, as if the workshops had learned from all the violence they had witnessed and distilled it into steel. Underground, the Pythagorean labyrinths responded to Yharnam's transformation by becoming even more maze-like. Chalice dungeons that had been mapped by previous expeditions rearranged themselves, creating new configurations that trapped explorers. The dungeons seemed to be growing, spreading beneath Yharnam like roots, perhaps trying to reclaim the surface city for whatever civilization had built them. Hunters who spent too long in the dungeons reported that the passages began to recognize them, opening paths for familiar visitors while closing them to newcomers. Chapter 27: The Evolution of Violence. The weapons of Yharnam evolved alongside its hunters, becoming increasingly specialized for the particular horrors they faced. The trick weapons, mechanical marvels that could transform between forms, represented a fusion of practicality and symbolism. Each transformation reflected the duality of the hunt, the need for both precision and brutality, elegance and savagery, humanity and beasthood. The saw cleaver, perhaps the most iconic hunter weapon, embodied this duality perfectly. In its closed form, it was a brutal cleaving instrument designed for close combat with beasts. Extended, it became a longer weapon, suitable for maintaining distance from dangerous prey. The serrated edge, specifically designed to tear through beast hide, caused wounds that wouldn't heal properly, ensuring that even beasts' regenerative abilities couldn't save them. The weapon's simplicity belied its effectiveness. It was a tool designed purely for killing, without pretense or ceremony. The more exotic weapons revealed their creator's descent into madness. The whirligig saw, essentially a mechanical saw attached to a pole, represented the powder keg's philosophy that hunting should be efficient rather than elegant. The beast cutter, a weapon that transformed into a whip made of connected blades, suggested its creator understood that hunting required becoming as monstrous as one's prey. These weapons weren't just tools, but statements about the nature of violence in Yharnam. Some weapons contained fragments of the cosmos itself. The Holy Moonlight Sword, Ludwig's legendary weapon, channeled otherworldly energy that could cut through reality itself. The weapon sang with cosmic power, its blade formed from crystallized moonlight that shouldn't exist in physical form. Those who wielded it reported hearing guidance from the weapon itself, though whether this guidance came from Ludwig's spirit, the moon presence, or something else entirely remained unknown. The firearms of Yharnam evolved from simple pistols to weapons that fired quicksilver bullets infused with the wielder's own blood. This blood bullet technique revealed the ultimate fusion of hunter and weapon. The hunter literally became ammunition, their life force transformed into projectiles. The practice was incredibly dangerous, weakening the hunter with each shot, but the blood bullets proved devastatingly effective against both beasts and kin of the cosmos. The church pick, a weapon that combined a war pick with a sword, was designed specifically for hunting the keen beings that had evolved beyond simple beasthood. Its thrust attacks could penetrate the unusual hides and protective shells that King developed, while its righteous nature blessed by the church made it effective against the unholy. The weapon's existence acknowledged that the hunt had evolved beyond simply killing beasts to confronting things that defied classification. Conclusion: the eternal hunt. And so Yharnam remains, suspended in its eternal night, a city that sought transcendence and found only transformation. The old blood, that miraculous substance that promised to cure all ailments, had indeed transformed human suffering, not by ending it, but by elevating it to cosmic proportions. Every drop of blood spilled in Yharnam's streets contained echoes of this original sin. The moment humanity chose to drink deeply from wells of power it could never understand. The hunters continue their work, though few remember why they began or what they hope to achieve. Each night brings new horrors, new transformations, new revelations that human minds were never meant to comprehend. The hunt has become its own purpose, violence its own justification. Those who enter Yharnam seeking pale blood, seeking truth, seeking escape, find only the choice between different forms of damnation: become beast, become kin, or become nothing at all. The Great Ones watch from dimensions that overlap with Yharnam's reality, their intentions as incomprehensible as their forms. Perhaps they pity humanity's plight. Perhaps they orchestrate it. Perhaps they simply observe, the way humans might watch insects struggle in water, feeling neither malice nor compassion, only a distant curiosity about how long the struggling will continue. Their influence permeates everything, making it impossible to determine where human will ends and cosmic manipulation begins. The Healing Church's grand experiment in human evolution had succeeded in the most grotesque way possible. Humanity had indeed evolved, but not into the enlightened beings Lawrence had envisioned. Instead, Yharnam had become a breeding ground for new forms of horror, new expressions of suffering, new ways for consciousness to experience its own dissolution. The city stood as a monument to ambition, unchecked by wisdom, faith corrupted by power, and knowledge pursued without consideration of consequence. Yet perhaps there is a strange mercy in Yharnam's fate. The citizens who transform into beasts lose the burden of consciousness, returning to a state of pure instinct, where complex suffering becomes impossible. Those who achieve insight into cosmic truth find their human concerns revealed as meaningless, their individual suffering dissolved into universal constants. Even the eternal night provides a form of comfort in darkness. One cannot see the full extent of the horror. The blood continues to flow through Yharnam's streets, carrying with it the promise and poison that defined the city's transformation. Each drop contains the history of the city's fall, the echo of every scream, every transformation, every moment of revelation and revulsion. The old blood remains what it always was, neither cure nor curse, but simply change, transformation without purpose or end, evolution without destination. For those who still dream of escape, who still believe the hunt might end, who still hope for dawn to break over Yharnam's Gothic spires, perhaps the kindest truth is the hardest one. There is no escape because there is nothing to escape from. This is not a nightmare from which Yharnam might wake. This is what Yharnam has become, what it was always becoming, from the moment the first drop of old blood touched human lips. The transformation is complete, the evolution achieved, the transcendence accomplished. Welcome to Yharnam, where the blood makes you free, free from humanity, free from sanity, free from the burden of hope. The hunt continues not because it must, but because it is all that remain. The bells toll not to mark time, but to remind any who still listen that time itself has become meaningless in a city where night never ends and blood never stops flowing. And somewhere in the cosmic void, entities beyond human comprehension observe the ruins of human ambition with whatever passes for satisfaction among beings that exist outside the constraints of emotion or thought. The experiment continues, the data collected, the results catalogued in dimensions where causality flows backward and existence itself is negotiable. This is the legacy of the old blood, not salvation but transformation, not cure but metamorphosis, not answers but questions that destroy those who ask them. Yharnam stands as eternal testament to humanity's greatest strength and fatal flaw, the inability to resist reaching for power that was never meant for human hands, the compulsion to drink deeply from cups that should have remained untouched. The hunt never ends because the hunt is not a means, but an end, not a journey but a destination. Every hunter who raises their weapon, every beast that howls at the blood moon, every cosmic truth that shatters another human mind, all serve the same purpose that no human consciousness can fully grasp. The old blood has fulfilled its promise perfectly, granting immortality through endless death, healing through perpetual wound, salvation through eternal damnation. So close your eyes, dear listener, and let sleep take you to dreams of foggy streets and Gothic spires, of blood and beasts and cosmic horror. But know that somewhere in dimensions that overlap with our own, Yharnam continues its eternal night. Its streets still echo with the sounds of the hunt, and the old blood still flows, waiting for the next civilization, foolish enough to believe they can master forces that existed before the stars were born. Fear the old blood, as Master Willem warned. But know that fear itself is insufficient protection against the seductive promise of transformation, for in the end, we are all drawn to the poison that promises salvation, the cure that brings damnation, the blood that makes us free. The night is long in Yharnam. The hunt continues. The blood flows eternal, and the great ones dream of things that make even nightmares seem like mercy.